take a seat. Philippe and a mic. Thank you so much for being at CYSAT. I introduced you in the formal way, mentioning your official title at ADS. But the truth is that you have more LinkedIn followers than I do. So I am very jealous. You know that you have 8,500 followers on LinkedIn? Did you know that? No, you don't know. You have no clue. Okay, well, you have a lot of people following you on LinkedIn, and I am very jealous, to be honest. Anyways, welcome to CYSAT. Very glad to have you here. We're going to talk about cybersecurity. You're the head of Telecommunications and Navigation. This is obviously a hot topic. Are there a few words that you would like to mention in terms of introduction, maybe introducing your role at Airbus Defence and Space, maybe a bit of your background, if I did not mention it properly, besides the number of followers on LinkedIn?
Okay, thanks Mathieu. Thanks a lot for the invite first. It's a real pleasure to be with you all to, let's say, to share what we do and to respond to the best I can to the questions in the domain. So Philippe Pham, Head of Telecommunication and Navigation Systems in Space Systems at Airbus. So this encompasses all what we do in SATCOMs, both in orbit and on the ground, meaning geostationary satellites like Eurostar NEOs, like OneSat, the software-defined satellites, working also on constellations, following up OneWeb Gen 1 and some derivatives. Navigation is encompassing Galileo second generation and EGNOS V3, so both ground segment and the second generation of constellations. Background, mainly space and defense, engineering, product line with Eurostar in telecoms. I've been working in satellite Earth observation imagery, spot image, Airbus DS GOSA, a bit in digital platforms and data analytics at Airbus Defence and Space, CTO. Then back in Earth observation, navigation and science, 5 years, and now moving end of last year to telecom and navigation.
You have a long career in the space industry, and I'm just curious to see from your own perspective, what change did you see throughout your career in terms of awareness in cybersecurity? Was that something you already had on your agenda 10 years ago, 15 years ago when you were working in space?
No, definitely. 15 years ago, this was not that important or that visible. Also, perhaps because of either technologies and the stability of the political world. We see, of course, nowadays a lot of instability, a lot of geopolitical, let's say, instability, a VUCA world, and also a trend from, I would say, between bracket hardware to software. A lot of digitalization, a lot of different accesses to assets, should it be infrastructures on board, on the satellites, but also ground segments, and also operations and services. So all along the value chain, vulnerability is larger, is more, I would say, can be threatened at each and every stage of the value chain. So this is very different than from 10 or 15 years ago.
Thank you. And obviously, Airbus is a big player in the industry. Globally speaking, you are the head of Telecommunications and Navigations, two very sensitive areas. Can you explain a bit from the high-level perspective, the big picture about how Airbus is tackling the level of threat? We heard Philippe Baptiste this morning mentioning that CNES was regularly under attack, and from quite a few years now. What are the big initiatives internal to Airbus to counter these types of threats?
Well, in fact, if we take it logically speaking, then from the satellite in orbit down to the ground segment and the operations, if I start with the, let's say, in-orbit threats, we are definitely protecting our command and control access to the spacecraft with respect to the risk of takeover, with in particular specific hardware on board, duly specified and I would say blessed by the authorities. We also take care of a certain number of issues on adverse potential services denial that we have also to take into account on board. What we are working also on let's say, anti-jamming capacity, on the capacity to make sure that the interferences that some I would say hostile bodies could threat for the spacecraft are geolocalized, are taken into account, are prevented. So in fact, all what can happen on board from command, control, services, interferences is really taken into account. And of course, we follow up all the evolutions there. Then we definitely protect our ground segments for, let's say, several cases for our customers first, to make sure that they are properly cyber secured. We have more and more also, we are monitoring our own infrastructures because we are operating our own spacecraft. So this means that we need to secure our operations to make sure of the, let's say, integrity of our capacities to operate, because we are operating our own spacecraft, both for telecommunications and Earth observation. So all along the value chain, given the fact that we are, let's say, a system prime and also a service operator, we are exposed, let's say, to all the threats we can face, and then taking into account all what we have to implement to secure all the steps, all the components of the value chain to deliver the service to our customers.
Maybe one question, because there's a lot of debate about the security governments, especially in large companies. I don't know if you can explain a bit also from a high-level perspective how your teams are distributed. For example, a very classic split is between the security of the infrastructure of the company, the corporate assets, could be emails, computers to employees, and the product security, which is really the product, could be ground segment, space segment, and so on and so on. How Airbus is organized? Do you have also different teams working on different topics? Or internally speaking, how are you organized from a governance perspective?
From a governance perspective, we have chosen in Airbus Defence and Space to, let's say, to strengthen our capabilities internally, to secure our own assets, and to address the full value chain. So meaning that across the various divisions, we've got air power, connected intelligence, and space systems. We make sure that we are capable to have the expertise and the links between the organizational bodies to really, again, address all the value chain, meaning that we have also strengthened our capacity to have this end-to-end expertise and support, in particular for our own programs, for our proposals to our customers, to be autonomous and to be able to fully address the full scope. So this is let's say the first priority of Airbus, even if it's not visible, is to have a very effective, all along the line, all along the value chain for cybersecurity of our assets and services.
We see products and services becoming more and more complex, including at Airbus, of course. We also see that the level of threats is increasing. Cybersecurity becoming more and more important, as you mentioned, compared to 10, 15 years ago. How is Airbus coping with this growing demand of securing assets, products, services, in terms of staff, hiring skilled experts, which are scarce on the market, or in terms of products and services that you want to integrate to your own products and services? How do you envision this ramp up to address the future level of threats?
Well, it's since we have chosen to have a significant internal capacity, we need also to develop our workforce, not only in the cybersecurity expertise itself, but also to be tightly linked to our products, meaning we are addressing equipment supply chain, we are addressing satellite design, assembly, and test capabilities. We are operating complex ground segments with several sites or several collaborations with customers or in-house. And then we are delivering services for a long lifetime of our infrastructures. So in fact, we first, from an organizational point of view, we have decided as Airbus Defence and Space to have a single organization serving, let's say, all the segments internally, to make sure that there's I would say, a strong learning curve, a strong expertise built up in our staff and in our management capabilities. We are, of course, recruiting. It's also a challenge to recruit the talents, but in fact, Airbus is quite attractive with respect to I would say, in particular, the space assets and the defense assets that we are operating or selling, by the way, to various customers in defense, in institutional business, but also at export. We are exporting quite a lot, in particular in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia. And our customers are trusting us in being able to bring this capacity and to secure their own assets.
You talked about these two different business lines of telecommunications and navigation, and the role of security to have a transversal layer to be able to serve these two BUs. Are there any big differences between securing product lines for telecommunications and product lines for navigation? Do you see differences in customer requirements, regulations, technology?
Indeed, there are both differences and synergies. I would say in telecommunications, what we see is definitely more and more proximity between commercial and governmental with dual use, meaning that we are, let's say, pushed to address more and more stringent requirements and stringent compliance to a certain number of governmental regulations. And our own commercial customers are asking us to do so. So being an actor in defense, in institutional civilian programs like EU, and also in commercial, enables us to really build some synergies in being able to respond to those cases. A lot of our commercial operators do operate their communication satellites as dual use, meaning governmental and commercial. Can talk to Eutelsat, to CYSAT, to a certain number of actors like that. Navigation is a bit different because it's a safety of life for the next generation of EGNOS V3 and the Galileo second generation in particular. So here we are following up EU guidance with respect to specific EU security requirements. And on EGNOS V3, it's been a challenge, I would say, to say the least, to adapt and to accommodate all the evolutions of the EU security requirements all along the way up to the delivery of the first versions in 26, 27. So it's a bit different because of the guidance, because of the requirements, but we are learning also to, I would say, bring the best of both worlds and to enhance our capacity to respond to those requirements.
I have a burning question. We talked a bit this morning about IRIS². Galileo is a big legacy program in Europe. Large budget for security. IRIS² seems to be a bit tighter. You mentioned that there are more and more dual-use missions where the frontier between commercial and defense applications is a bit more blurry. How do you cope with that at Airbus, knowing that you've been in the business for years, decades, with really dedicated security products embedded in your own systems, and now clients that want to have the best of both worlds, from the commercial market with very modern equipment and services, and dual-use defense customers that want still to have some reliability in terms of their security via certification. How do you find this trade-off between these two worlds to really pin and have the best compromise between new space and legacy?
Well, I don't know if new space plus legacy equals next space, but with our experience and the fact that we have also implemented effectively on our previous generations, should it be protection of command and control, anti-jamming, geolocalization, interference management, even a certain number of other, I would say, capacities that I will not disclose here, makes us capable to really adapt in an effective way, meaning in terms of competitiveness, but also in terms of compliance to requirements, to make sure that we, I would say, adapt and find the best solution. So we are already used, in particular in the commercial SATCOM market, to let's say to protect the assets of our customers. We are already embarking ComSec, TransSec, geolocalization items, a certain number of onboard, let's say, equipments which are protecting the assets of our customers. And on the ground segment, similarly. So making this, I would say, step-by-step evolution is for us quite natural. And then we will discuss with the customers what is the best compromise between price, schedule, and level of protection.
We also talked about this morning about the future EU space law, trying to regulate and impose cybersecurity requirements to satellite operators. I guess considering that Airbus is addressing such a large spectrum of the market, can you mention maybe a few regulations to which you have to comply for some of your customers? Could be in Europe, could be US. What is today the main, most popular standards or certifications, regulations that you work with at Airbus today?
Well, we witness, let's say, not a convergence, but a certain number of our commercial customers in telecoms are referring to some US regulation reference.
Like NIST or...
Exactly. So we know how to comply with, and in particular, we have some solutions which are readily compliant, and then we apply those solutions. So of course there are some guiding regulations which are, let's say, mostly used by our customers, and then we just comply. Of course, at EU level, bidding regularly for ESA, for USPA, for EC programs, should it be Copernicus, Galileo, and the upcoming the connectivity constellations, then we will comply with the guidance.
Do you have a specific message to, for example, we had Guillaume Delabrosse this morning from the European Commission mentioning that we want to impose something to satellite operators because we feel that this is something they should do. But on the other hand, we don't want to damage the competitiveness of European players. What would be your recommendations for the European Commission to design a law that is relevant for everybody? I know it's a tough one.
On security, I think, I mean, we are all a community in Europe, and we need to kind of have this loop between industry, governments, EU, to learn from each other and to find the best compromise not compromise, the best solutions to protect our assets and services. What I would say is that we've been a little bit weak up to now for space debris, which is also another regulation, in particular in low Earth orbit. So here, I would say recommend that we push our EU standards to the rest of the world as a best behavioral, I would say, requirement, and that we are making sure that it's not detrimental to the European industry, in particular being alone to comply with some regulations and the rest of the world not complying. And again, I'm more addressing debris than security here. But debris is part of security as well, with respect to collision avoidance, with respect to making sure that the next generation will be able to use the low Earth orbit in the midterm, long term, and this is compromised right now.
We had also Clémence Poirier this afternoon. She was talking about the lessons learned from the Ukraine conflict, especially the attack on Viasat, a commercial player. So we clearly see that commercial players are getting more and more exposed to cyber threats. You're really used to work with military and defense players. What are the big differences between these two markets that you are serving in terms of requirements, in terms of habits, practices?
Well, as I mentioned, there's definitely a convergence due to the dual use of the assets in orbit by our customers, in particular commercial and governmental, when we are talking both our home countries in Europe, but also export. In particular, we really do see that in our export markets in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia, that's for sure. We are learning, of course, our governmental requirements or military requirements are far more, let's say, demanding than even the commercial dual use. But we are learning and we are, let's say, reusing what we somewhat develop to some extent for the military use to a dual commercial use, because a certain number of capacities, should it be command and control protection, should it be geolocalization of interferences, a certain number of other, let's say, capacities are more and more becoming standards, because our commercial customers want to benefit as well from those protections, because they know that their assets will be in dual use, and then they have to kind of comply with a certain number of requirements in terms of security, in terms of capacities, in terms of protection, so that they now anticipate to really, in their requirements, in their procurement requirements, to implement, and they ask us to implement.
Maybe can you specify a couple of programs, flagship programs that you are looking forward at Airbus in the future, in the 5, 10, 15 years, the big constellations, missions, clients you are currently working on? Can you tease us a bit?
Well, in the SATCOM market, even if I will not start with the constellations, I definitely look forward to the software-defined spacecraft. We are working very hard on OneSat. We have 9 satellites in the making. We've got, let's say, a number of very big innovations in digital processing, active antennas, full flexibility on board to reconfigure the frequency plan, the geographical coverage, let's say the power on the spots, etc. So it's the next generation, fully flexible, fully digital, which can be also shared, interoperable, etc. So this is the big next generation of SATCOMs in GEO. I really trust in MIL-SATCOMs. We've got a certain number of big initiatives in home countries, but not only. And we here need the latest, largest capacities in X-band, UHF, Ka-band, both digital, flexible, with big buses to embark, and which are also really significantly protected. So there's a line of sight here. Constellations, sometimes we are asked, okay, what did you do? I'm sorry, we are just the first one in orbit with OneWeb Gen 1, competing with Starlink. Nobody else is there. So we are preparing the next generations. And of course, as you might know, hard work on the current RFPs, both from EU for IRIS², but also from Eutelsat for OneWeb Gen 2. This is definitely the next steps for us, while we have this experience already. Navigation, I think being on board both Galileo second generation, next batches upcoming, first launches end of 26, 27, using Ariane 6, and then EGNOS V3, in particular for the air traffic management, coming up in 27. We are there for the decade and beyond. So quite proud as well as Airbus to serve the European community with this next generation of navigation systems. So really, I think a bright future, complementary assets with respect to in particular, the telecom domain and the navigation domain. I would add also a few topics. I would mention the convergence of technologies in telecom and navigation. We do use active antennas. We do use digital processing. We are using similar platforms, Eurostar Neos, both GEO and MEO. Also on the supply chain, working a lot with the European supply chain to strengthen some of the domains like electric propulsion, power subsystems, specific thermal assets, of course, digital processors, active antennas. And I insist also as a European, we are also, I would say, strengthening our European supply base with all the main, I would say, space countries like France, UK, Germany, Spain, Italy, Belgium. So I think it's very important also to have these flagship programs to really develop, let's say, the European footprint and the European industrial workforce and capacity.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. I encourage everybody in the room to ask questions. If you have to, Philippe, on the ConnectMe application, I'm going to see them coming up. I have 2 more questions to you. You talked about OneSat, software-defined platform. The more software you put, the more potential CVEs, vulnerabilities you may embark. Do you work with ethical hackers? We had last year a team hacking satellites belonging to the European Space Agency. Do you have red teams at Airbus? Do you work with bug bounty platforms? Do you test your systems with security professionals? How do you work?
Oh, definitely. Now that we have more and more software on board, more and more COTS, more and more, I would say, to be agile, to be competitive, reusing also some information systems which are existing or capacities which we can reuse. We are very attentive to how we develop and use those software, and also, let's say, testing penetration, testing I would say the whole implementation with both our internal expertise and capabilities, but also having the blessing of the authorities, that we are definitely protected at each and every step, both in hardware, software, but also in the operations, even addressing as well what we do in assembly, integration, and test, all along the lifetime, in fact, of our assets, from design, security by design, up to the operations. And because, as I said, we are, let's say, operating our assets for us or for our customers on lifetime, like 10 years or 15 years. So we need to really have continuity in our capacity, and also to adapt on a daily basis to what we learn and what is happening in the rest of the world.
Thank you. You talked about the importance of supply chain and building a European ecosystem, especially. And in the same time, we have Iris Squared that wants to include 30% of SMEs and new space companies. What is the policy or the approach, the philosophy at Airbus to work with newcomers, new space companies? Is this something you do already, something you want to do more in the future?
No, doing already. By the way, I was one of the founding members of the Assise du New Space, Station F, right after COVID in 22-23. We are preparing the third season. In-house, we have been working with 10, 12, let's say, startups in the various domains. I must say that in my previous remit, I worked a lot in Earth observation. So we are working with a lot of, I would say, not only SMEs, but startups, both in the domain of payloads, meaning instruments, but also satellite, ground segment. I saw the flag of Lean Space. We are working with them in Domino X, in some other activities, and also in services. So should it be in Plan de Relance, France 2030, if I'm just touching on let's say the French ecosystem, but we do the same in Germany, in Spain, in the UK. And I would say not only on the institutional business, but also in some of our export capacities, like working with U-Space, for example, in some of our export proposals. So completely open, more than open with respect to ways of working, agility, new ways of thinking, innovation, but I would say being complementary. I expect that I would say these new inputs will enable us to develop, to bridge our gaps, and to bring additional value, again, with either additional new domains or new capacities or differentiators on the marketplace, on the performance, and also building for the future. So this is how I see this, let's say, complementarity between the startups, the SMEs, and the legacy players.
Super. We don't have any questions on the application, and I don't have any more. Do you want to add a last word as a conclusion?
I think we, as Europeans, we need to continue with a high momentum. I mean, space is less and less a niche market. We, in particular in telecom, I see now some better inclusion and convergence with the terrestrial network in SATCOMs. We see more and more, I would say, that the complementarity and more and more public usage of all the capacities brought by space. Of course, naturally, telecommunications, navigation, Earth observation, but upcoming some additional topics like Earth science, climate monitoring, of course, weather forecasting, exploration. And I think we do need to take this momentum to the next step and to support industry with also new programs, innovative programs to develop industry, because industry is, let's say, the bread and butter of a strong Europe.
That's a great word to finish. Thank you so much, Philippe. Bravo.